So, really excited to introduce my guest today, a great colleague of mine, a mentor, a friend, Mr. Bailey. Thank you
Hello,
very
that's
much
me,
for
Mr.
joining us
Bailey. Thank
today.
you for having me on your podcast. I'm elated.
Appreciate it.
I hope that we can empower, share a lot of information to help a lot of people out there
Mhm.
watching. Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, no, I really am happy that you could actually join us because I know you have a lot of wisdom and a lot of stories, hopefully, that you can share with us today. And so let's just jump right into it.
Let's do it.
How did you fall into the educational space?
That is a very interesting question. I fell into the educational space in a roundabout way.
Hmm.
I didn't even really think that I'd ever use the courses that I took. I took some courses for early learning or early learners,
Okay.
and I was at the time working in a telecommunications company for 17 years plus. So I just thought, okay, I'll take these courses just to empower myself, get some extra knowledge under my wings. Go figure, I'm now working in education. After that, working in the telecommunications company, I worked in a nonprofit for about 10 years. So I kind of just fell into education. It was definitely non-intentional. But yet, that's my livelihood today. That's my work
So
today.
what would you say drew you to like doing this work?
Ah,
Because working in business for 17 years, then transitioning to this is a big jump.
it is. That's a very good question. What
Yeah,
drew me to this work was being
yeah,
born and raised here in this space where we are.
yeah.
We're not going to say where we are. We're somewhere in the world. Maybe people will figure out our accents. Maybe that will give it away. Our accent where we are. We're not speaking in French right now, but we're speaking in English. Hint. Being born and raised in this space made me want to empower others that looked like me
Mhm.
through the educational channels because I know myself and one of my siblings, we were in a French immersion program and we were pretty much the only two racialized students in our spaces.
Mhm.
And it wasn't always a pleasant experience.
Mhm.
And I mean, print is everything nowadays in the learning spaces. But when I was coming up, there was no books that looked like me, no stories about me or my lived experience or
Mhm.
my racial experience in the space that we're in. So, hence, that was one of my motivators for getting into early learning education, specifically early learning, because I feel that stats have shown that a child's personality is formed from 0 to 6. Not saying that it's set at 6, but the first 6 years of life pretty much impact and kind of structure the way a child is going to maneuver this world, specifically a racialized child. So if you can get to a child within that time, you can positively or negatively impact their education tutorial, like their direction that they're going to
Right,
take.
trajectory.
Trajectory, thank you.
Yeah,
Yes. So
yeah.
hence that was my reason to want to get into early education,
Mhm.
as well as just having a love of like early learners. There's something about the early learners that I find that's so joyful to work with.
Mhm.
You know, they don't give you that much attitude. They're willing to listen to you.
Right.
They're willing to discover new
Mhm.
things. They don't have cell phones. They're not stepping to you after school or after the learning space if they had a beef with you. So
Mhm.
I feel if you really capture them at that point of their lifespan and their early learning journey, you can
Mhm.
positively impact them, especially as a Black male.
Yeah, I want to touch on that male part because specifically that to start with the early years, and the reason why is because we find in elementary that actually there aren't nearly as many male educators. And so I would agree that your impact being with early learners as a Black male has probably made a huge difference in the lives of a lot of these kids that we probably don't even begin to realize. Like for myself, like I had my first male teacher, I think when I was in middle school.
Yeah.
So to have a male teacher so young, I think is really impactful, obviously, especially for our male students. And then of course the representation piece for our Black males as well, that may not see that representation ever across their entire educational journey, to have you be in their presence for such a young age, I think is very, very impactful.
I
So
think so too. And to quickly add, it goes beyond my classroom space because me being one of the few Black males in that early learning experience, other students, racialized students from other classes, would come to me to ask me questions about,
Mm,
oh, what courses should they take, and even further along and going up to the grade 7, 8, oh, what high school should I go to? Because of knowing me and me being in a space, that
mm.
goes to show how much representation is really impacting a lot of our early learners and students.
And how much a caring adult really matters in a space for them to come back to you years later and still ask your opinion and your advice speaks tenfold about the impact I think that you've made in their lives.
Definitely.
So let's delve into that a little bit further. Like
Okay.
a regular what does a regular day look like? Or specifically in the classroom, let's start there. What does that look like for you?
Okay, the regular day for me, because I'm above and beyond educator, of course, I'm in my classroom at 6 a.m. I'm getting everything set up. I'm no, I'm just joking. So for a regular day for me looks
Yes.
like I get to my classroom at about 7:30, 8 a.m. I set up centers.
And let's just set the stage. How far is that before the bell rings?
That's about 45, that's about 50 minutes prior to the bell, the main bell
So
ringing. 50
you're there 45 minutes before the day
before
actually
the day
begins.
actually begins.
Okay,
Yes.
understood.
Reason why? Because a lot of times I'm in a shared space working in early years. I'm in a shared space with before and after care. So there are a lot of times in the space. So in order to, I see it as this, it's like a show. You do your pre-shift, showtime, and then debrief. So myself and my co-educator, that's the way we look at the format of our day.
Mhm.
So to make a successful day, you have to go in early. I don't know about people saying they just run in at 8:50 or 8:45. In the early years, you can't do that because first of all, you have to set up the centers. You have to have a morning message written. You have to have some type of format of schedule and routine because this is what early learners thrive off: schedules and routines, and some adults, most adults as well.
Exactly, yeah.
So once there's that schedule and routine in place, that's where the learning happens, and the learning actually happens when they're having fun. So
Mhm.
you have to be creative in the way you set up your centers, the way you set up your classroom space. A lot of times we refer to the classroom as the third teacher because actually the children are learning from the space more than they're learning from the educators.
Mm.
And that's why we like to co-construct that space together with them in the beginning of the year. In the beginning of the year, the students never walk into a classroom packed with things on the wall. Everything should be co-created with educators and students.
So just to clarify, when we're talking about learners, we're talking, or sorry, centers rather,
Yes.
we're talking about learning centers, or I guess learning like stations that kids move throughout the day.
Exactly. Well, I should have been more specific. They're learning centers based off the early years curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
And in the early years, a lot of times the morning focus is language and the afternoon focus is math. So we'll do centers around language and around math based off fun activities that have an end learning goal.
Interesting. Yeah, and I noticed that early years, not even just kindergarten, but early years in general, incorporates a lot of centers. I have seen older teachers, sorry, teachers of older students start to incorporate these as well. Just because what we're noticing is some of our older students have somewhat of a limited attention span, but it also kind of promotes this idea of like collaboration and working together with
Yes.
people on things and maybe working at your own pace. And I am also understanding that you guys go through a lot of setup. So from a day-to-day basis, having to show up 45 minutes ahead of your scheduled time to be there, um, is I think a lot of people listening might say there's no way I'm ever going to go to my job 45 minutes earlier, that I have to be there. But I think it's really interesting that you said that you wouldn't be able to do it without making that sacrifice or without making that commitment. It sounds like your role would be a lot more difficult doing that. And so one of the things that I want to sort of just move onto is, well, what are some of those other responsibilities that maybe people don't know about, that's not necessarily part of your job description, but yeah, people don't realize. Like, I don't think, sorry, not to cut you off, but I don't think a lot of people that are not in the industry recognize how early teacher or educators go to this space to set up and get ready, or how late they might stay. But what are some other things that you do that are, again, not part of your job description, but you find yourself doing?
That's an excellent question. So we grow in community, we're stunted in isolation. When you're in the early
That's
years,
a gem.
we grow in community, we're stunted in isolation. As an educator in the early years,
Yeah.
your community is your parents. They're your resource. They're your go-to. They know everything about your students that you're interacting with.
Hmm.
Students come to this learning space with language, with math knowledge, with cultural knowledge. That's very, very key to their success in the classroom.
Hmm.
So we have to invest in parents. Whereas maybe later on in the grades and in high school, parents aren't as much as a bigger factor for success. So when I talk about community, I'm talking about the parent community engaging with the early learner community, finding out what the child likes at home. This is the things that a lot of people don't know that we do to build a healthy classroom and to build and promote healthy learning. Finding out the likes and dislikes of the child, finding out if they have a second language, which is key. We're already in a space that we have a dominant language, and language is power. Children can learn up to 5 languages before 12. There's something about the brain that kind of severs off at 12 years old. But up to 12 years old, children can learn up to 5 languages. So a lot of parents would be like, oh no, when you're at school, you just speak English. No, continue to promote your home language. It only sharpens your child's brain because they can learn up to 5 languages before
Wow.
12. So once again, these are things that as educators we do behind the scenes that a lot of people don't know. We're ultra super investigators. We're
Hmm.
constantly getting information from parents. We're constantly sending out information to them either via email or face-to-face communication about what does your child like? What do they not like? How's their learning style? What are they excited about? With all that information gathered, we can then make successful centered based off the child's likes. Because like I said earlier, children are learning when they're having fun.
Hmm.
So the learning centers always have a learning goal at the end. So this is some of the things that we do as educators that people don't know. We're constantly investigating. Sometimes we're invited to social events from our students. We'll go, just to get to know the family more and the family context. And we have to be mindful. There are many different types of families. So there's not just some stamp of there's two-parent families, there's single extended families, there's same-sex parents, there's transgender families. We have to be mindful of the demographics that we're working with and be able to accommodate with all of them the same efficiency, the same care. So that in itself is really, it's testing because a lot of educators come to spaces with implicit bias.
Hmm.
Like they'll say, "Oh no, I love everyone, and I see shades of gray." I hear that all the time. No, I don't see shades of gray. I see black and white. I see color, and I see diversity, and I try to work with what I see to the best of my ability.
Can we dig deeper into that comment? What do you mean by shades of gray?
Some people, because of the anti-black racism that's prevalent in certain spaces, they like to say they see shades of gray, meaning that they don't really see color. If they see a black person come in, if they see an Asian person come in, if they see a white person come in, they're all the same and they're treated the same. But you and I know that's not true. Because based off of race, even in the healthcare system, a lot of people, there's a myth that blacks have a higher threshold to pain. So they'll be left in waiting rooms extra longer, for example. Whereas if somebody from another race comes in, they'll be attended to faster.
There are a number of studies that actually back up the fact that Black women do not get the same level of care that other demographics do. So there is a lot of truth to what you're saying. I think that's really, really interesting. And how do you navigate those types of conversations or those types of issues?
Very, very good question once again. I navigate it on a per case basis
Hmm.
because sometimes there's a reverse. Because of my size, because of my stature, some families sometimes when they're approaching me, they're a little bit cautious. They'll be, "Oh, you're a big black guy. I didn't know what to expect." But then I started talking to you and you're okay. And you're really nice. And that takes me aback, like, whoa, what were you expecting?
Hmm.
So the more I talk, the more I'm accepted. So it's very interesting. I have to deal with each family very specific and based off of their needs and their lived experiences. Because I can't just assume that every family that I'm going to work with is going to accept me as an educator for their child. There's always going to be implicit biases on both sides.
Hmm. And then I'm sure because of those biases that kids might come to the classroom with, that's being demonstrated in certain ways. So, for example, I've seen classroom dynamics where certain boys did not respect females, for example. So they responded very differently with a male educator versus a female educator. And so I wonder, like, what do you do? How do you handle students that are struggling with these types of biases, or maybe even emotionally or physically or behaviorally, to be more specific? How do you, as an educator, sort of deal with these types of issues?
Very good question. So, first and foremost, we always refer to our classroom as a classroom community. And
Right.
a community is made up of many different people from many different socioeconomic backgrounds, racial backgrounds, sexual orientations, many different people from different diasporas of the world.
Right.
So, at the beginning of the year, we set up our community guidelines and rules that everybody has to adhere to. And we co construct them with the students. And of course, we hear a lot of rhetoric from a certain males and from certain communities that women are regarded as less than, or they don't, there's colors that are associated with women, like say pink, or blue is associated with boys. So right away in the beginning of the year, we squash that. We say a boy can wear pink, a girl can wear blue. This is a gender-friendly community classroom space. So as educators, if we set up the classroom with this tone, the children will just fall in line with it. Even though they may be learning different narratives at home, they know once they're in our classroom and once they're at school in our space, it's a zero tolerance zone, it's a safe zone, and it's a place where everyone can be free to be whoever they want to be, regardless of what their family narratives may be telling them at home. Once they're at school, that's all squashed. And we do that through print. And that's why print is so important, to have representation of all families from all walks of life in every classroom space. For example, when I was growing up in this place that we are in, there wasn't too much print that represented myself. So I always felt like strange because there was always print that represented the other majority of students that I went to school with and not myself. So print actually empowers a lot of different families, a lot of different groups, a lot of people who are not the so-called majority here. But demographics have changed a lot in this space over the last 20 years. So that's why print is constantly evolving and changing as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Even just little things like commercials, there's a lot more representation than maybe there has been in the past.
For sure.
So yeah, that's really great to hear. And it looks like that relationship, the partnership piece with the families, obviously relationship building with the students are paramount to making sure that you sort of, I guess, squash any issues related to behavior, or any biases that maybe they come in with.
For
And
sure.
so then let's talk about the relationship that maybe you have with your colleagues or your co-teaching partners. How do you make that partnership work? But more specifically, what does that partnership like look like?
It's very interesting. It's like a relationship. You have to look at it from that point, and relationships are based off respect and honest communication.
Right.
You have to look at it like this. Both educators are coming into the space with different knowledges from different academia, some from college, some from university. You have to think of it like you're doing a picnic and you want a really nice table. I'm going to come with 3 of my dishes. You're going to come with your 3. It's a beautiful spread. But we have to be mindful of our information and our academia and what we bring to the table. And we also have to be mindful of, we're not going to mention the elephant in the room, money, because there's a huge difference in terms of the pay for one of the educators as opposed to the other. So in terms of efficacy, time that you're going to really put in at home, extra time you're going to give, the person who's making double than the other person, the onus is going to fall on them to take care of more of that efficacy, like in terms of report card writing, doing more of the menial task. In the systems that we work in, sometimes there's preps that are given to one of the educators and the other educator doesn't have any prep.
So you mean like
A paid period at work where you can do work,
preparation period?
preparation period at work where you can actually prepare at work to do more centers or do additional academia that you're going to present during the day.
So do you find that that creates sort of tension and conflict?
It definitely does. Because one of the educators is seen as higher than the other. There's almost a hierarchy. Even in something as simple as classroom lists, the so-called higher paying educator, their name only appears on those sheets. The other person's name doesn't even appear. It sounds like something minor, but that could build animosity. Because at the end of the day, everybody wants to be seen, heard, and respected. And if my name's not on a piece of paper, but I'm working with the students all day long, I don't feel seen there. So that may seem small, but it can be huge if there's not a good relationship with both educators in the room. We're talking in early years. So there has to be a form of song and dance and
Yeah.
banter that works for both of them.
And it sounds like a little bit of vulnerability on the part of maybe the person that's being paid a bit less as well, just to be okay with not allowing that to be the source of conflict. Do you know what I mean? So
I know exactly what you
I'm just
mean.
wondering, like, what other ways that might manifest itself. Like, it might not be just with the relationship dynamics in the classroom. How else does that manifest itself? And I wonder, like, why do we feel that EAs or educational assistants are not compensated in the same way that other educators might be?
Very good point. Because there's an assumption that a lot of EAs or CYWs or ECEs.
Can we just clarify what these
Okay, an EA is an
are?
educational assistant,
Yes.
an ECE is an early childhood educator, and a
Yes.
CYW is a child youth worker. And then there's a OCT, Ontario Accredited Teacher, right?
Right, or just like a qualified teacher.
Qualified teacher, right?
So
Yeah,
these are all different types of educators.
that work in the same
Way. Right. Okay.
But at the end of the day, one has a highest pay scale. So that person who's from the highest pay scale, they're going to have the paid prep periods during the day. They're going to have an hour lunch. They're going to have like certain perks, whereas the EAs and the CYWs a lot of times have a 30-minute lunch and don't have any paid prep periods.
So
during the day.
same amount of time,
Same day, yeah.
same day,
Yeah.
dealing with the same student,
Same student.
working in tandem with one another.
Yes.
But one person gets double the amount of lunch
Yes.
and gets
Double the
paid
amount of pay.
significantly
Yes.
more.
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
So, but the system was created for this way, obviously for some type of purpose, right? But at the end of the day, a lot of these other titles, they also have university degrees. They also have lots of work experience that people don't even consider. There's just like, they put them in this box. Oh, well, you're this or you're that. So if there's not a good banter or relationship, forget about banter or relationship. If there's not respect for the two people who work with these students, it can become very messy and it can become very toxic. Because at the end of the day, I want to say my co-educator and I both have the same goals for our students to be successful. There shouldn't be this kind of banter or animosity between each other. We're here for the students. But if some people are not mature enough to squash all that kind of stuff aside and just do their work for the students, it can become a very toxic work environment.
Well, I mean, I have to be honest, like, even in my own experience, I often say this, it doesn't matter where you work, you're going to be hit with politics. We could be working in McDonald's, there's going to be some kind of politics that exists there in that job. Um, and so I think that this profession is no different. What I'm wondering though is what are some of those misconceptions that people might have about educators that are not labeled as teachers? What are some misconceptions that you think people
Very
might
good.
have about your relationship or your working role or
Very good point. One of the biggest misconceptions is that they're lazy. Because it's like there's like a hierarchy of education almost. And a lot of the educators who are making more money would be like, why don't you go back to school? Like, you're here with me all day. You can do it. But they don't realize that some people, like, myself, are in a third job with this education space.
Exactly.
And some people are comfortable working this job, but have another job they work on the side, or they're passionate about other things. So there's a misconception, number one, which is huge, that the other educators are lazy. Second misconception is that they're not smart enough. That, or they weren't able to go to get the master's or the PhD or the BA.
So here's
right?
what's interesting about that comment, just to interrupt just for a
Yes.
second, because what they often say, and we are very well aware of this comment, is that those who can't do teach. So what's very interesting to compare is the fact that now you might have a teacher that might be looking down on another educator in essentially the same way, right?
Of course.
Which is very, very interesting. And what's also interesting to me is the fact that teachers often complain that they are paid a low wage. So I think that this conversation is very eye-opening for maybe a
Yes.
lot of educators out there that are getting paid perhaps less than a teacher. And this is a story that we don't often hear about. We do often hear about the low wages that teachers are receiving.
That is true. And I'm glad that we're having this conversation because knowledge is power. And there's a lot of misconceptions within this, like these systems that we work for in them, but not of them, because they're set up for certain people to be very successful, whereas they're set up for other people to constantly feel like they're never actually making it, or that they don't actually make a contribution or difference in their the students that they work with lives. Exactly. But for some people, the real payback is not necessarily financial. It's like I was saying, having students come back to you year after year to thank you for your contribution in their education, having parents bring you gifts after years of you working with their kids, thinking like, your child's in university now, you're still coming back to see me. That makes you know that you've impacted a life. And I feel at the end of the day, in the system that we work with, especially being racialized male educators in the early years, we have to positively impact these children, because there's too many other negative stereotypes, especially about Black males, like that you're either an athlete or you're a rapper or in the music industry. I mean, that's great for people who are in that. But I'm laughing because, like, I've never been a rapper and I've never been an athlete.
I see.
But people would look at me and make that assumption. Why? Because I'm 6'3" and I happen to be Black. And I'm Black, but I have other ethnicities. My grandmother was Chinese. I can hold on to that Asian heritage as well. But oh no, I have to just identify with just Black. So there's so many layers and levels to, it's like that old activity we would do in university, the what was it, the mountain or the not the mountain. They do it in uni all the time.
Iceberg.
The iceberg. You see me as a Black man, but I have a right to my grandmother's Chinese heritage as well.
So let's
get back on track.
No, let's clarify that activity. So the iceberg activity, some of you may know, is essentially where you take an iceberg and you show the top of the iceberg, which is above water.
Yes.
And then you demonstrate the bottom of the iceberg, which is underneath water, which could be, in fact, as big as a mountain.
Exactly.
Right? And the idea is that what you see above the water are things about my identity that you can clearly see without me necessarily having to tell you. Whereas some of the things that we see below the iceberg are things about my identity that we don't necessarily know. So,
or necessarily have to show or even share with anyone.
I think that's really important to mention, because when we talk about identity, there's going to be a lot of people that are listening to this that are saying, oh, don't bring your identity politics into this. But the reality is that certain demographics and certain people have to navigate an educational space in a certain way. And you just spoke to that. You spoke about the idea that you kind of had to overcome these stereotypes of the type of person that you would be. And sometimes, and I've seen it happen in my own experience as a teacher, is that it's really hard for kids to sort of struggle through that when they're really tall, for example, and expected to be a basketball player, don't know how to dribble a ball, and people are making fun of them. And it's like they're supposed to feel bad about themselves now. It's
or
like,
they're not a rapper, or they're not speaking.
I don't listen to that music.
No,
so, like, or somehow it's like we have a society that like tries to make that kid feel shitty about themselves.
Of course. Right? And or the Nebonics, like the slang talking and stuff.
Oh, yeah,
like, and then if you speak properly, oh, you're speaking white. Like, my parents happen to be from a Caribbean nation, but in our home we always spoke English and we spoke another language, right? French. But we were never promoted to speak in any other dialects or anything, but people assuming that, like, hey man, what's up? We're talking in slangs and stuff, and thinking like, I don't relate to that. I'm from here. So, like, it's interesting what people expect you to sound like and the opinion you're expected to have. And if you're opposite of that, you're looked at like, oh, you're strange, you're weird.
Well, I mean,
excuse me?
This is perfect segue, because I just feel like, do you think that that's one of the biggest challenges that you face in your role?
It was
overcoming some of those.
It was a challenge, but as I became more comfortable in my role as an educator, I became more bold and brazen in me. Like, it's not my problem what anybody thinks about me. And that may sound so simple, but it took me almost a lifetime to really embrace that statement. It's not my problem what anyone thinks about me, as long as I'm good with myself. So when I walk into a space now, I'm into a classroom, I walk in with a boldness that I never had when I was younger. I mean, 20 years prior to now. We're not going to talk about age. Yeah. So I walk in with a boldness now that I never had before. And I teach from that posture as well. So I'm more, because of all the bad life experiences and bad experiences in this learning spaces in this place that we're living and working, our lived experience.
Yes.
It's actually a setback became a set up for success. I love acronyms.
Yeah.
I'm the acronym king.
That's a good
A setback is a set up
Set up.
for
Yeah.
success.
Yeah, let's
You
go.
live life forward, you understand it backwards. And the more you get broken down, the more taller you can stand. Because once you keep getting back up again, like that great poet sent, American poet, I think Maya Angelou. It's Maya Angelou, God rest her soul. It's all about getting back up. Because everyone falls. And this is what we have to teach our children, the resilience to know that, yeah, you've fallen, you can still get back up. You've been on crystal meth, you've been a drug addict, you've been an alcoholic, you've been sexually active, you can get back up again. And once they have somebody encouraging them to get back up again, they will be successful.
Yes, I want to agree with you, but then when they leave the walls of that school, the problem is society doesn't necessarily always give them that message. So oftentimes I will talk to students in my school about their behavior in class or in the school, and then try to relate that to how that behavior would be, what's the word? How perceived, I guess, outside of here. So, for example, we're talking about behavioral issues, perhaps negative language, and outside that might some of those behaviors may end somebody in jail. And unfortunately, we live in a society that I do not believe is quite well versed in rehabilitating people that make mistakes. So we actually punish people when they make these mistakes, and what we struggle with is giving them a second opportunity or giving them another chance, right? So I wholeheartedly agree with you. I think this is what we as educators we do all the time.
Yeah.
I just feel that society or outside is not in lock and step with what we're doing.
That's so true. And
in
I
the school.
think
I was a person that would go to sleep
thinking
really
about
late.
curriculum, thinking about work,
Yeah,
thinking
and
about
then just wake up, and then I'd be coaching the sports after school, and I'd be doing this and that. And then when I'd say, "Hey, why don't you help me coach this?" or "Why don't you?" I have this initiative to another teacher, let's say,
yeah.
and they'd be like, "No, I have to go back to my kids," and they'd walk off, and I'd mumble under my breath, being like, "They're so lazy. Like
Yeah.
they don't want to give anything to this
Yeah.
job. Like I'm here doing this, that, and the next. Like they barely do anything." And then fast forward to when I have kids, and then I'm like, "Nope. Here's my cutoff point. I don't care. I have my own kids. I
Yes.
actually have my own kids." So it's not that I don't care, but it's that my priorities shift a little bit. So instead of giving my everything and my all to the job, I then, just like you're saying, realize that no, there's something that's bigger than this and that's bigger than me and that needs me more than I can provide to this school or this industry.
Learning
right?
space for sure.
Yeah.
Just to piggyback off what you said,
Yeah.
if you're thinking about work, you are working, right? Everything begins and ends in our mind. If you're thinking about work, you are working.
Oh,
Hold on to that one.
Oh,
I
yeah.
love that one.
yeah.
If you're
That's a
thinking about
really
work,
good one.
you are working.
That is a good
And when you have children, when you have responsibilities, you have to be kind. The love of self is the greatest love of all. And saying no with confidence takes, for some of us, especially some of us who are workaholics, it takes us years to practice the art of saying no. Because when you
Literally
start to
years.
practice your no, you start to become more healthier. Because you have to tell yourself, I'm giving myself 2 hours max to work. After 2 hours, I'm done. You go for your run, you go for your swimming, you go for your walk, you do that other things. That sharpens yourself as an educator, as opposed to going home and working till 11, 12 at night, not eating, not doing anything else, and then waking up at 5:30 to do it all over again. No. Once you start to manage your time, there's only 24 hours in a day and only one you. And once you start to really manage that time, have your time for your workouts, for your interacting with friends, that makes you a better educator. So you need to practice the power of your no, because there's a power in your no. A yes man or yes woman at the end of the day is a person burnt out.
A lot of educators are listening to this, nodding their heads, but thinking like, I don't disagree. I just don't know where I'm gonna find the time to do all the other
And
stuff.
this is a perfect time to segue into another topic that I wanted to address on the podcast today: the different layers and levels of educators and statuses and status rights. An educator who's early in their career is going to do a hell of a lot more than somebody who's 10 years plus or seasoned in. And those people who are 10 years plus or seasoned in, they're going to look at those early educators like, yeah, they're just trying to make a name for themselves or whatever. And that creates a hierarchy or like a discourse within the educator community in general. Because there's going to be that eager beaver who's just 2 years in, or a short-term contract or whatever, doing the 12 hours, doing the sports, doing the coaching. And then there's going to be that 10 plus years seasoned person saying, yeah, I did what I had to do for my class. I'm off to take care of my family. Good night. And then who's going to be looked at more valuable in a learning space? It all depends where you are in your teaching or education game. That has to be also mindful.
What is being valued in your
Space. Hey, we said that at the same time.
Yeah, no, it's
Administrators make spaces, not buildings. Another frame.
well, the thing
Administrators make spaces, not buildings. The administrator sets the tone, the
definitely a
climate.
conversation for another time, but I do agree that administration has, I mean, it's top down, right? So it starts with them and they definitely set the tone. I just, it's so layered, as you said. And yeah, it seems like we're just kind of talking about like self-care and how to balance the multiple responsibilities and roles that you have in this position with like a personal life. And it's like, yeah, we could distill it down to work-life balance, but for some reason, I feel as though this isn't just that when it comes to education. Because of exactly what you mentioned. If you're thinking about work, you're still working. And how many educators leave the space and spend all evening and then every waking morning thinking about their work?
The majority.
The majority of them. So it's just something to really consider and think about if we're really striving for that work-life balance. So having said that, then, if there was one thing that you could change about how schools operate, what would it be?
If there was one thing that I could change about the operations of schools worldwide, this is a podcast that's going to be reaching the world with technology, AI. I think that from my perspective, honestly, or like from my perspective and my lived experience, one thing that schools need to change worldwide is having more face-to-face time, having more assemblies, getting back to the school being looked at as a community, not like this isolated, everything's sent online, everything's in emails, because there's something about having face-to-face assemblies, even if they're once a month or once every quarter, that make the school a community. And like I said at the beginning of this podcast, we grow in community, we're stunted in isolation. The earlier students need to see the graduating grade 8s. The grade 8s need to see the grade 4s. The grade 4s need to see the early years. Because if they don't see each other as a community of learners, they're not going to have that respect. It's not going to be organically, genuinely generated within them. And there's going to be discourse. And there's not going to be a sense of community in the school. And there's not going to be a sense of belonging. So it all goes back to building that community with something as simple as an assembly once a month and that checking in. And I always advocate sunshine calls. You know, a lot of students are labeled as young as the early years.
What's it? Can you
A
clarify?
sunshine call.
Yeah.
Calling the parents to say, your child did amazing today. Whoa,
Rather
the
than
parents.
just for a negative
Negativity.
reason.
And this is something that can really empower parents as well, because our parents are doing a lot nowadays. Parents are busy. They're trying to keep their jobs. They're trying to get promotions. They're trying to parent. They're trying to have a life. They're busy. And if you have a child who has special needs or who has some specialities and some behavioral issues, the last thing you need is every day your school calling you to tell you how bad your child's doing. But if there was a sunshine call incorporated, at least once a week to say, your child was amazing today, that can make a difference for that family. And it can empower that child to want to do better more often. Because the parent will be like, or the caregiver will be like, wow, I got an amazing call about you today.
Mm-hmm.
Go figure. So remember, words are very powerful. They make or break our experiences, and they make or break our children.
And then, as just one final question for our interview today, what advice would you give to someone just starting out in this role?
Very good question. First of all, this is a very good rule, but it's a calling. If you're getting into this role to make millions, bounce over to the business sectors. Start working on your own business.
Well,
If you're in this job to make millions, bounce over to making your own product online or whatever you're going to do. This work, I feel, is a calling. It's not so much a profession. It has to come from inside. You have to want to see results from your students, regardless of your pay raise, regardless of what condo or how many more properties you're going to purchase that year, regardless of what you drive or what neighborhood you live in. This work needs to be given to those who are genuinely interested in children progressing. Not for a quick buck, not here for the vacations, not here for the status, not here for all the discounts you get from all the perks you get as an educator. You have to have a genuine care for our children, because guess what? Our children are our future. We've lived our lives halfway through already. They are the next prime ministers, business people, sports, everything. So my advice to somebody starting out in this field, make sure you genuinely are interested in the success of our children. Not the pay scale, not where you're going to drive, not where you're going to live, not your side hustle. Make sure you're genuinely interested in the progression and success of all of our children, regardless of socioeconomic status, regardless of orientation, regardless of race, regardless of all those other layers and levels of minutia, whatever you may call it. And on that note, it's been a blast being on your podcast. Thank you for having me.
Want to say
you can reach me on all of my handles if you want to further this conversation. That's another conversation.
No, but I just want to say too, just to add to what you're saying, that the kids, that they have a sixth sense, and they will be able to sniff out if you're disingenuous, and they will make your life hell. I've seen it over my years as an educator. People that come in for the paycheck, people that end up being in a space they really don't want to be at. Kids are the first ones to notice. One thing I love about this job is that kids don't filter themselves. If I get a bad haircut, they're going to tell me about it. If what I'm dressing, what I'm wearing looks silly, they're going to tell me.
Straight up.
They're not going to hesitate.
No filter.
No filter.
No.
So I would say that I'm in complete agreement with you. This job is not for the faint of heart. It's also not for someone that's looking for a big paycheck. Having said that, I believe our educators, just in what you described, deserve a lot more compensation than for the work that they're doing than they're currently getting. And this is not new information. It's not my new idea. This is just a known fact. You're just confirming this with the conversation that we had today. So with that, I just want to thank you for making yourself available and for coming and sharing your wisdom and your gems with us, like always.
No, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I look forward to being on another podcast. This conversation has just begun.
You are always welcome.
And for your listeners who want to reach me, I will let them know my social handles to extend this conversation. If you want to continue this conversation with me, you can reach me on any one of my social level platforms. They'll be available after this platform. Thank you for checking in on the podcast today. And remember, you got to represent. Peace.
Peace.